what is it about this moment that's so interesting? Well, to understand that, you have to understand a little bit more about this interesting Pluto-Neptune cycle. And one of the things about this cycle is that Pluto has an extremely elliptical orbit. And what that means is that there are certain times when it's moving around the zodiac at about the same speed as Neptune. And so there are two periods during this 500-year cycle when Pluto and Neptune are moving at the same speed around the zodiac. And what that means is that they go into aspect and they stay in aspect for about 100 years.
Oh, wow, they hold hands for quite some time.
Yes, exactly. And they do it twice in the cycle. Now, if we look back at the last cycle, they did this from about 1450 to 1550, something like that. And that takes us from the invention of the printing press right through the sort of early Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation, which was this spiritual revolution, essentially, and it was driven by the printing press. So we have, Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses on the door of Wittenberg Church. He's protesting against the corruption of the church, and he's saying, we need to go back to basics with our religion. We need to focus on scripture. Sola scriptura is his kind of phrase. So he was saying that we need to focus on what we can read from the Bible. And the printing press enabled Luther's translation of the Bible and all these kind of pamphlets that are getting written that are kind of pushing for change and criticizing the church. It's kind of very much like our present day, right? Pamphlets then, tweets today. It's similar. And so we have this 100-year process with this long waxing sextile, 1450 to 1550, and it culminates in this kind of spiritual revolution. There's a second time when this happens in the Pluto-Neptune cycle, which is the waning trine. And this happened between roughly 1690 and 1790. And historians will tell you, almost precisely, this is the Enlightenment period, right? So when you know that you're onto something when historians who don't know anything about astrology and think it's bullshit are actually saying what our astrology is showing us. They just don't realize it. And at the end of this long waning trine, we have these big revolutions, right? We have the French Revolution, we have the American Revolution, we have these new kinds of state coming into being who are overthrowing the idea of the divine right of kings and are saying, everybody's equal and giving sort of universal rights and so forth. Obviously that this is a kind of idealized vision of things, as things are more complicated and of course, in reality. However, what we see is that basically we have this 100-year period, then we get to the end and there's this kind of revolution that somehow the sort of changes that have been brewing for 100 years come to fruition. Now, the reason I'm talking about all this is because we're in one of those periods right now. We're at the end stretch of the current Pluto-Neptune cycle, which began in the 1940s. And it's going to take us into, probably through the 2030s, or maybe the middle of the 2030s. The Pluto and Neptune are about to start making exact sextiles for the final time in this cycle. And they'll do it between 2026 and 2032. You may have heard other astrologers and people talking about this kind of period, or talking about 2032 somehow as some sort of bound.
Big time. Big time. Everyone's 2025, 20 to 2032, 2012 to 2032. It's like this 2032 is like this huge piece.
Yeah, and I think there are different ways you can see that. I think other astrologers might have different rationales, or other people who are trying to understand what's coming. But this cycle really does specify 2026 to 2032 as the final phase of this long sextile. And here's the other really interesting thing. So I talked about the previous cycle. At the start of this long period of change, we have the invention of the printing press. What happened at the start of this current long sextile? Well, in 1947, we have the invention of the transistor. This is the single invention that really enabled the information technology revolution to happen, enabled what we're doing now to happen. It enabled everything.
The internet, AI.
Absolutely, all of that. And so you can see a really interesting similarity between this cycle and the last one. At the start of the long sextile, at the start of this long process, we have the invention of a information technology device, right? The last one we have the printing press. This one we have the transistor. And now we are looking at the sort of culmination of this long period. And you have to imagine that the transistor, that the internet, that the AI, all these kind of technological devices are somehow going to maybe drive some culmination, let's say, of this long sextile. And this is one reason why I've been saying that I think there's some kind of spiritual revolution on the way, which is something that I know probably quite a few other guests on your channel have also been saying and have also seen in other ways. But I think that this cycle, what it does is it kind of confirms that this could really be in the offing, and it does it by showing us that this has happened before and can happen again.
Can we zoom in a little bit on the cycle? In 2026, Neptune and Pluto are doing their thing, but then there's this, is it Barbell, one of the people you really look up to and respect, and he talks about this minor grand trine that rears its head, or reveals itself, with Uranus, Neptune and Pluto sort of going into this really beautiful sort of configuration. Did he call it the most benefic, like the most beneficial configuration of the entire century?
He did say something like that, yes. André Barbeau, this late French astrologer who my own approach to astrology takes a lot from. He's somebody who kind of pioneered this cycles-focused approach to world astrology. And he saw this astrology that we're coming into now coming quite a long time ago. And as you say, that was right. He really singled it out as this is something extremely benefic about this configuration. And it's a minor grand trine. So we have three planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, these three powerful outer planets in astrology that are in this harmonious configuration. We have Uranus and Pluto in a trine in these air signs of Pluto, of Aquarius and Gemini. And then we have in the middle, we have this Saturn-Neptune conjunction right now. And so it's a really kind of geometrically beautiful configuration. And generally, one of the other things to say is that all of those synodic cycles of these planets are now in their, once Saturn and Neptune complete their conjunction in 2026, they're all going to be, almost all the synodic cycles, except for one, I think, are going to be waxing and not waning. And waxing cycles tend to be more about growth and new things coming into the world. Waning cycles are more about contraction and consolidation. So this is one reason why there are potentially good reasons to be hopeful about the coming years. There's a lot of doom and gloom in the air for good reason. There's some worrying things happening in the world, but the fact that these cycles are in their waxing phases, it does suggest that we can get through this stuff, in one piece. It doesn't suggest kind of calamitous events, or at least not as bad as you can imagine. There are always going to be teething problems with big changes and contention when a new world emerges, because people jockey for position when things change. But yeah, so you're right. Barbeau saw this coming. He's a very accomplished astrologer, so I always give some credence to the idea that based on his predictions, things may well kind of turn out quite well in the next few years.
Hey there, Inspired Evolutionary. If you absolutely loved this, well then here's a full conversation with this guest on the Inspired Evolution podcast. Check it out now.